everyone. To finish us out before we have our lunch and some networking, we are in for a treat. So Michael, our president of the society, and Stacy, our member at large, are going to give a very short presentation that talks about using effective visuals and effective use of jargon-free language. We heard last year that people wanted practical takeaway tips that they could go back and utilize and, in their work from day to day. So they volunteered to do this, and I'm sure there will be some interesting tidbits for you all to noodle on and take forward in your work. So without further ado, Stacy and Michael, you are up.
What's that? Yeah. Wait, we need the clicker. All right. Practical takeaway tips coming at you. So the reality is that we read and process both words and design, but we also read very little, less and less. This number keeps shrinking each year. And really what we're doing is scrolling and scanning and skimming. So I think a lot of our advice around this is changing more quickly because of our technology and because our brains are changing the way that we're reading. Most of us are reading on our phones. And so it means that some of our traditional public health information doesn't work so well, right? This is could be anyone's webpage. This happens to be the EPA, and I think no one from the EPA is here, so it was safe to pick on. But we all do this, right? This is sort of how we learn to adapt our content for the website, and we thought we were doing a really great job of it. But really what we need right now is something a little bit closer to this. And you can see the difference between the two examples. This is about the amount of information that folks are looking at. And this, I live in DC, and so DC happens to follow this method. And they started with this thing called the 7. And so each morning I get the 7 top stories, and this is the exact amount of information that they use. And this is where we need to be thinking about as a field in terms of amount of content. And so it's called the Smart Brevity Model. Many of you may have heard of it. This is from some of the Axios guys. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from this. I'm not saying it's perfect format, but I think there are a few takeaways. And the format is essentially the headline or the tease, and then the one strong first sentence, only one. This is like when we counsel our clients, we're like, you can have one main message and only one. And then the context, so the why it matters, and they often use those exact words, why it matters. And then an option to dig deeper. So in the web world, we used to talk a little bit about bite, snack, meal, and this is sort of bite, snack, meal on steroids. So again, you'll see that this is the Washington Post sort of modeling that exactly. So when we were all kind of trying to get some great information on air quality, we've got the one main message, we've got the why it matters, and a little bit more information with some links that let people go deeper. And so some tips and guidance on how we do this with both words and images. We want to grab people, obviously, with the visuals and also the words. And sometimes those really plain language direct words actually work to grab people because they're not used to seeing that type of language, especially from public health folks. So you want to be direct in both our design and our language. We want to create a message hierarchy. That's really important. So start with the most important information, offer that context, and then avoid the clutter, the jargon, and the abstraction. And what we're really doing is helping our readers process that information more quickly by tapping into a few of these visual cues. And what that does is it frees up more of our working memory to actually read and understand the information. So here's a really simple example. These are some nice words. They're in plain language. we can all understand them. But if we group them visually, we start to make a little bit more meaning. And if we add contrast and grouping, we make even more meaning without changing the words we're using. So these are really simple visual design tips that we can do to create that context and meaning along with our plain language.
So building on that, I just wanted to have a disclaimer. I'm not a designer, but I'm very passionate about the topic, and I have had some training. So just to start out with a quote, like beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I think we hear that a lot, but it's like, is it truly when it comes to design? There's a lot of, there's critical components to health communications materials and campaigns that design can help kind of make or break some of our campaigns and our work. So it's important for us to do it right so that we're engaging our audiences in the right way. There are some basic design principles that we should know, and that's what we're just going to walk through them kind of quickly to help you develop, edit, provide feedback. I hear a lot in my work where it's like, I'm not exactly sure why I don't like it, but I hate it, basically. So this should hopefully help you understand a little bit of the concepts behind it. If you're a designer, you can tune out maybe for the next few minutes, but if you're anybody else, I think hopefully these will give you some important tidbits. And also, it's really important for us to be thinking about accessibility of design. And so walk through a couple of concepts around accessibility, and then we're going to provide some resources as well. There's a lot of great tools that we should all be thinking about. If designers that we're working with or not, let's be that extra layer of checking to make sure that we're designing for accessibility. So really simple visual, but just to kind of demonstrate what we're talking about, the first is alignment. So alignment is the most basic and also the most important principles of design, as it allows the eyes to see order in the concept or the visual. So have you ever looked at a design and not known really where your eye looks or where to look, left to the center, all over the place? Having a strong point of alignment within the design allows your eyes to seamlessly flow through and hopefully the visual message of the design. The next is repetition. So think of repetition as consistency. By repeating elements of a design, you immediately create a familiarity or identity of the design itself. The next is contrast. For contrast, think legibility and color values. Contrast is created when two elements are on the opposite ends of the spectrum. Obviously, this is using kind of black and white, but obviously when you're using full color, that's important as well. For example, big and small size, classic contemporary fonts, thin, thick lines, cool and warm colors, dark and light, smooth and rough textures, horizontal, vertical. Those are all different components that we can use that fall under contrast for design. It plays a crucial role in the organization of information in the design. It gives the reader, the viewer, a guide of where to look first, what's most important, what stands out. For contrast to work, it must be very obvious and very clear. So often like really sleek design, I'm sure you see them all the time where it's like, this is so beautiful, but it's maybe like a little too things that are not like, they're too similar, or it's not using some of these core design principles. So I know that we often want to default to designers when we're creating things, but it is important to kind of push back, and knowing some of these terms will be important. The next is hierarchy. So not everything can be big and bold, although we want it to be sometimes. I know we talked about like a single message, so building on that. If it is, like the whole thing will kind of fall apart. So it's like, what is the key takeaway of your material? What is the number one key message? And make sure that that's super clear. Hierarchy creates organization to a design, and it gives the reader an idea of where to begin, where to finish. Each element that is part of the design can be given a ranking of priority. So if it's maybe you have 3 messages, let's rank them 1, 2, 3. Make sure that the first one is kind of up there in terms of the hierarchy. A designer can use them to make decisions around the position, the size, the contrast, the color, to ensure that the desired hierarchy is achieved. This is one where I really think that people often, again, default to maybe some of your designers. If you know what the number one key takeaway of this material is and maybe they don't, it's really important you can cue that in when you're giving them, maybe a Word version or a version that's before design, to make sure that they know exactly the level of hierarchy of your content if it's not completely clear in the material itself. The last is balance and balance tension. So Think about the predictability. It provides a stability and a structure to a design, either through symmetry or tension of the elements. So think about like capitalizing on the negative space. Again, just making sure that you're kind of supporting all the other elements of design. So just gonna look at it really quickly, a couple of examples. I think you all have probably seen a million, and you could share a couple with us in terms of what bad looks like. But just kind of a good and a bad example to kind of show you of like when these elements are not kind of brought to bear on the content itself. So, you know, you don't know where your eye doesn't know where to go. It's like, is the most important information here the date? Is it the title? Like the fine print is a little hard to read. There's just a lot going on. Whereas we start to bring in like a beautiful design, but we start to bring in the elements of hierarchy and balance and other things that we talked about. Just another example here, same thing, like lots of information, hard to read, don't know really where to start. You know, your eye is supposed to go first, where the option on the right kind of using color and contrast to really lay out the information and design. I would say that I think like there's a couple things missing here from both of these like good examples. And so while it it was good a couple of years ago, I think the designs may not be accessible to all of our audiences, including those with vision impairment. So as I said, to improve the accessibility of our designs, just a few tips. We suggest running your visuals through accessibility checkers. This is something that if your design teams are not using already, definitely we're going to send these around, and we're going to put them in the chat as well for the folks that are online. There are lots available, but definitely put your designs and other types of content through the checkers. Include alt text in social posts, Word documents, PowerPoints, and all other materials. I've seen a lot on like LinkedIn, people talking about this, like, oh, people think it's an extra step and it's a little bit more annoying. It's more content that I have to get approved. But imagine this is like your experience in your online, and you see people engaging, loving things, like kind of commenting on the content, but you're not actually be able to see what's in the visual. So it is really important from an accessibility standpoint. Always use accessible captions on videos. I think we've started to see a lot of captions being used, but then I noticed that a lot of them aren't hitting the ADA standards. So another thing, just to make sure that when you're taking the step of adding things like captions, making sure that they are hitting the right standards to ensure that they're accessible. And also, I think a lot of folks are developing websites, so making sure that they're compliant with global standards. There's a lot of new resources out there that can help you kind of check and make sure that it has the right plugins and other tools to make sure that the websites are compliant. I think the last slide is just that we have some resources here. Feel free to take a photo. Again, we can send these around after. We're going to drop them in the chat. I think Mike's going to do that for folks that are online. I think the first one is mentioning the book that Stacy mentioned, which I think Ashani had raised to us, and I have at home, which is a great resource in terms of the jargon-free writing, and then just some other resources here, especially around accessibility for design. That concludes our little level up learning.